Welcome to SAMRIDH's Connecting the Dots series. Through this platform, we will engage with healthcare experts, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and academia for short but insightful conversations. Within these wide-ranging discussions, we will aim to capture different approaches that are enabling market solutions to scale and make quality healthcare accessible and affordable for the vulnerable populations. Our first session of the series is on developing and scaling artificial intelligence solutions to solving complex healthcare challenges. AI, automation, and other tech enablements are affecting industries today in profound ways, and healthcare sector is no exception to this. With rapid advancements of these technologies, paradigm of healthcare delivery is changing and is ready for a big leap forward. To talk more on this, we have with us today Mr. Prashant Warier, founder and CEO, Qure.ai, a leading AI company in radiology. Prashant is an expert in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning and has architected and commercialized several AI solutions. I'm also delighted to invite our host for the session today, Mr. Himanshu Sikka, Project Director, SAMRIDH, and Chief Strategy and Diversification Officer at IPE Global. Himanshu has over 20 years of experience in international aid and policy, health sector reforms, health financing, financial investment advisory, and institutional strengthening. I would now like to request Himanshu to take the discussion forward.
Thanks, Prashant. It's an absolute delight to have you with us today, especially on the first session that we are doing on connecting the dots under SAMRIDH's healthcare blended finance facility. Qure.ai has been a great partner with SAMRIDH, and as a leading health tech firm working in the space of AI, we are really excited to hear more about what all you have been doing over the last few years, and especially under the partnership with SAMRIDH. SAMRIDH, as you know, began working with Qure.ai earlier this year, and the idea is to enable the scale up of some of your innovations and algorithms that you have been working on in the Indian healthcare ecosystem. And we, as a group, we truly believe that the solutions that you have in place are truly groundbreaking and can have a great impact on the diagnostic space in the country, and not just in India, especially also in other resource-constrained countries across the globe. And that's the idea where we kind of thought of working and supporting Qure.ai and its growth journey. Would be great to hear more about the growth journey that you have had through Qure.ai over the last few years. And maybe to just start the discussions, it would be great to understand that what kind of problem statement that you started with when you decided to set up Qure.ai, and how do you feel that that journey has progressed, and in terms of where do you see it making a big dent into the Indian diagnostic ecosystem?
Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, Himanshu and Vinaina, for inviting me to this first such event, and very glad to participate on behalf of Qure. My name is Prashant Warier. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Qure. Himanshu, I think, great question. And we were just chatting before this, and I was telling you that I have been a data scientist and I've built everything from algorithms from every space, from trucking to fashion to advertising technology. And my previous startup just before Qure was using AI to target ads at customers. How do you make customers click, and what is the probability of a certain customer buying a certain kind of product? And based upon that, you show them ads and they buy, and then sort of we make money as a company. That was the product I was building earlier. And for me, I think coming into healthcare was a big opportunity. Felt like this AI technology could be very beneficial to healthcare in general. And specifically, we looked at radiology imaging, which is basically imaging AI, because imaging AI was back in 2016 was way better than AI in many other areas. So we said, can we apply deep learning technology to imaging techniques? And basically, imaging in healthcare is both, it's radiology and pathology in general. And radiology is far more digitized. So we picked radiology as a space. And within radiology, initially we spoke to experts, radiologists, physicians across maybe 5-6 different countries, from US to UK to Middle East to India. And ask them what kind of problems can we solve, right? What is worth solving? And one of the things that always came up is that, see, X-rays nobody wants to read now. And if you look at, I mean, radiologists have sort of graduated from reading X-rays to now reading CTs, ultrasounds, MRIs, PET scans. So there is more and more imaging that is coming out, and it should be felt like, I mean, a lot of people initially, I mean, I felt initially that if X-rays are not being read so often, then maybe they will go out of fashion. I mean, people will not take X-rays, but the number of X-rays is still increasing. It's not that the number of X-rays is decreased, right? The number of X-ray systems that are there, number of X-rays being taken, that is still increasing. So that is an opportunity. And on X-rays, I mean, by far the largest volume is chest X-rays. So there is a substantial gap in the number of X-rays being taken and the number of X-rays being reported, and that is global. I mean, if you look at, for example, even a developed country like UK with NHS, right? X-rays are not reported very quickly. I mean, it takes a long time to get X-rays reported. Sometimes it's several months, and even then, it is reported by radiographer, not by radiologist. So it's the amount of focus is very low on X-rays. Error rates are super high because of that, because people are reading that very quickly. Many times they're not read. So error rates are super high. And that's where we come in. We said, can we help improve the reporting of X-rays? And can we detect whether an X-ray is normal or abnormal? And if it's abnormal, can we find multiple kinds of abnormalities on the X-ray? So that is the initial idea of how this came about. And over time, we sort of figured out various specific use cases, for example, tuberculosis screening, where we could create a lot of value addition. And we can talk about that later. But I just wanted to say that lung cancer screening, tuberculosis, heart failure. I mean, there are many areas where we started finding out more opportunities around this. And today, our X-ray AI product QXR is, I mean, we started with the idea of automating a lot of reporting, but I mean, we have achieved a lot of that. Today, it is CE marked, it is FDA cleared, it is cleared across about 70, 80 countries globally. And today, this technology, QXR, is adopted in maybe about close to 60 countries. And we are at about 600 plus sites, maybe closer to 700 sites where this technology is being used right now, again, on a global level. So I'll pause there and just wanted to tell you what our motivations were in building this.
Really, really impressive of what we've achieved in the last 5 years, especially moving from AI to ads, from ads to healthcare. I think so. That's a really good move, and at a time that was very, very critical. But do you think that if you look at the Indian health ecosystem, leave out the larger towns and cities, if you go to the tier 2, tier 3 towns and rural areas where, again, having a radiologist is a luxury, I would say, in most of these locations. But do you see that the X-ray related infrastructure in these spaces, be it for any kind of diagnostics, TB you mentioned, or any other areas, do you think the infrastructure is there to enable or to allow the use of AI the way QXR and other algorithms that you work on require?
Yeah. No, that's a very, very interesting question. And I mean, I think what we have seen is very different from what we initially imagined. So when you look at, for example, when we started Cure, when I started thinking about Cure, I thought that the market for these kinds of advanced technologies will be US, UK, Europe, developed countries, right? But the reality, I mean, the reality is that the need is so much higher in the developed countries. And this is like, a lot of countries, I mean, let's say African countries never had a regular landline phone. They moved directly to mobile phones, right? And if you look at financial technology, I mean, Paytm and all that we have in India, US and UK and all had that much later than India, because India was able to develop that and make it live, and people started using that so much more, right? And today, I mean, credit cards are not so common in India. I think those kinds of technologies are more common. While if you look at developed countries, they are still in the old age banking, which is more of using the credit cards or bank accounts and all that. So I think there is a substantial shift, and countries like India are able to adopt technology much more fast because of mobile phones and technology, internet access being available. And the kind of technology that we have built out does not require much. I mean, it basically requires a very minor, very small internet connection, very sort of enough, like maybe 5 Mbps is more than enough for us to be able to upload X-rays and process that, right? So we need a internet connection which can upload X-rays, and that's enough. That's about it, right? Now, from a Cure perspective, what is it that we need? Right? Now, what India has and most countries have is there are lots of X-ray systems. What we don't have, infrastructure is easy. I think talent is harder. Getting a doctor to read that X-ray is hard. So getting an X-ray machine in Baran, for example, we are one of our first sites in India was this district of Baran, where we said we wanted to start working with Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog said, why don't you deploy this in this aspirational district of Baran, where they are struggling to report X-rays. So we said, okay, we'll deploy in Baran, and there the challenge is that X-ray system is there, it's a hospital, everything, right? But getting an X-ray rate takes days. And what happens is the patient comes in, they get an X-ray, and these are people who are walking, coming from so many different parts of the state, right? And they sometimes travel 30, 40 kilometers, maybe 50 kilometers to get there. And once they go away, getting them back is very hard. And what we were able to do is that we are able to now, in the hospital, as soon as the X-ray is taken, within a minute, we are able to alert that this patient could have TB. And based upon that, now you can go and do a microbiological test. And that radically changes the diagnostic protocol for TB. Now that patient could have been diagnosed maybe a week later, is now diagnosed the same day. And that is the value. And that is something which, I mean, over time we realize that there is a substantial lack of quality healthcare access in many of the developed countries. And that is where AI can fill that gap. And it's also interesting that many of these countries, I mean, like India or let's say Philippines or Malaysia or many African countries, they have been far more eager to adopt AI because they have that need, as compared to, let's say, some of the sites in, let's say, US or UK, where they may not necessarily need AI. I mean, they have very high quality radiologists. They are able to read scans, right? So I think the need is higher, and there is also a inclination to adoption, which is also higher in some of the developing countries.
That's great to know that you see that Indian as well as other developing countries adopting technology faster than many of the European and the Western countries. A related question, like in terms of, like you mentioned about its use case in TB, but you used it for COVID as well. How easy or difficult was it to kind of adapt it to the case of COVID and then take it forward from there and convince the government as well as health facilities that the same technology can be used for other areas as well?
So when we started building, we never sort of had a TB solution or a COVID solution. What we always had is a chest X-ray interpretation solution. It can identify consolidation, pleural effusions, cardiomegaly, all the critical abnormalities on a chest X-ray, and be able to do that within a minute. That was the technology, right? Now, when COVID came, March 2020, we were looking at data from China on how does COVID look on an X-ray, and there was a lot of papers that was published then of how COVID would show up on an X-ray. And typically, it's like consolidation, which is basically a white mark on the X-ray, and so you have got consolidation on typically on both sides of the lung, so left lung and right lung. Plus, it is typically in the upper parts of the lung. So again, there were some sort of indications on what COVID would look like on an X-ray. And what we were doing is fairly simple. I mean, basically, we said we can already detect these abnormalities on the chest X-ray. It's not like we have to build a new algorithm to be able to detect these abnormalities. What we have to then say is that, okay, based upon how the abnormalities are and where they are, we can create a score for COVID. And we said, okay, this is either somebody has got a fully normal X-ray or they've got an X-ray with certain abnormalities, which are not indicative of COVID. And there are some abnormalities which are indicative of COVID. So we can basically create a COVID risk score based upon what we see on the X-ray. And that is what we created. That was not very complicated because we already had the underlying technologies. We just had to put a scoring on top of it to use that. Now, what happened with government is that at that time, early days of COVID, we were also trying to figure out how to get people tested for COVID, because people were lining up. In Mumbai, there was only one hospital where you could go and get tested. So we're working with the BMC, the Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation. And there, I mean, they had only one hospital where you could get tested for COVID, and they didn't have enough testing capability to test everybody who's coming up. So what they said is that, can we now, at least for people who have clear abnormalities on the lung, can we use X-ray as an alternative? See, RT-PCR is more accurate, obviously, it's able to detect COVID better, but can we use X-ray as an alternative? And can we use the cure score as an alternative where testing is not available, and then quarantine those patients? See, if I go to the hospital and I've got abnormalities on both the lungs, I've got consolidation on both my lungs, then definitely I should be quarantined so that I'm potentially at risk of spreading COVID, right? So they quarantine me based upon that. So that was how people started using that. And so what happened is that the X-ray become almost like a proxy for the RT-PCR test. So you can basically take that X-ray very quickly. I mean, the RT-PCR test takes a while to report, and initially it was much longer. Over time, it got reduced. Plus, initially, if you look at some of the rural parts of India, there was no RT-PCR testing available. They had to send it to the city. So that is where we deployed at many places where the X-ray was almost like a proxy for RT-PCR, while the RT-PCR testing got done. And in some places, initially in Mumbai, for example, what they were doing is they had these mobile van screening programs where they were taking a mobile van with X-ray into the slums of Mumbai, and they were testing people in those slums. And if the X-ray was abnormal, then they were actually testing them using the RT-PCR test. And we found some people who had no symptoms, but no symptoms of COVID, but they were diagnosed with COVID purely because the X-ray was abnormal. We were able to find abnormalities on the X-ray. And then when we tested that, we found that 85% of the people that had abnormalities on the chest X-ray that Cure marked as positive were actually positive for COVID. So that became a protocol. Over time, I think the value of that technology sort of died because RT-PCR testing became easily available. I mean, everywhere now today we can get an RT-PCR test in few hours, and so that became easily available. But while it was not available, it was still very valuable in the first year or so.
Definitely, it had helped a lot of states and local bodies, like you mentioned about Mumbai, address the challenge of low testing infrastructure available in the initial days, as well as speed up the diagnosis and screening. But like if you look at your own journey over the last 5-6 years, you mentioned about impressive number 600 plus centers where you have scaled up. But the journey would have been full of challenges, I'm pretty sure. If you could list a few of those challenges that you faced, and what do you feel those challenges are kind of common across the startup ecosystem, or they were specific to Qure.ai? If you could shed some light on that.
Yeah. So I think the challenges, many challenges. I mean, over time, I think what I realize is that challenges are always there. The scale of those challenges goes up. And initially, the challenge was about getting data. I mean, getting data to train the algorithms. Right? How do you? AI requires a large number of scans, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of scans. How do you get that? That was a challenge. But I think for us, that was the easier challenge because living in India, we had access to a lot of hospital systems who were able to provide anonymized data without any patient identifiers, which could be used to train the algorithms. And in India, I mean, as you know, any hospital, even the smallest hospital, will have so many patients as compared to outside of, I mean, let's say US or UK, right? So we had volumes, and that is something where for us, coming out of India was a huge advantage. I mean, we could basically get access to a lot of data. That was first challenge. I think the second challenge, which is a tougher challenge for Indian companies, is to once you build the technology, to create credibility is hard. I mean, people feel like company coming out of India, I mean, they may not necessarily have the best technology. How do they compare to an American company? How do they compare to an Israeli company? Right? That kind of, there is that little bit of mindset, I think probably more in our nation than outside, I feel. But in any case, I mean, that was something which we solved by focusing very, very heavily on research and publishing papers in some of the top journals. We got published in the Lancet, and I mean, Lancet is the second highest rated medical journal, and we got published in that journal in 2018, 4 years ago. And from there, we got published in Nature Scientific, Lancet Digital Health, a lot of high profile journals. And we always focused on doing quality research, working with, let's say, Harvard Medical School or a Mayo Clinic, so that we could publish that research, working with Stop TB Partnership, McGill University in TB. So again, very, very open to doing research and publishing. So that sort of built that credibility. So building that credibility was important, right? So data, then algorithms, credibility. And I think the next piece is regulatory clearance. And this is only for healthcare companies because you cannot really sell these products without having, first of all, the evidence. People want to see evidence. You cannot just say, okay, I have this technology, start using it, right? Evidence is important. But then you also need to get the regulatory clearance. You have to get an FDA clearance or a CE marking or clearance in each geography. That is something which was again a challenge for us initially because we didn't know how to approach that. We didn't know how to go about getting, let's say, an FDA clearance. So first time we actually applied, we failed. We didn't get an FDA clearance. They rejected our application. But over time, we figured it out. We figured out how to get FDA clearance, how to get CE marking, how to get clearance in other geographies, let's say Brazil or Saudi Arabia or Australia. So that was again became a strength for us over time, where initially we were not fully aware of how to do it. We now exactly know how to go about doing this across the world, and probably the broadest range of clearances globally that we have for our products. So that was a challenge. And then once you get that, I think the challenge is, the last piece, which is the probably the biggest challenge for any company is figuring out how to get users for your product, how to get people to pay for your product, right? And you have to have a very strong use case where something is really changing something, providing a substantial value for your customer. And that is where, we identified those areas where we could really radically change diagnostic protocols. So TB was one such area. We said we are radically changing the diagnostic protocol with TB, right? Lung cancer is another area where we are radically changing the diagnostic protocol with lung cancer. So we picked up those areas where we could create substantial impact, where AI could create value, which is very, very, that value has to be extremely high so that people start adopting it. Because if the value is marginal, then getting adoption is hard and you have to basically work much harder. So I think we picked up those areas where the value prop is very strong and we went with those value propositions. And over time, we have seen traction in those value propositions. And over time, we've also expanded those value props, across imaging modalities from X-ray to CT, head CT to chest CT, ultrasound. So that's again something we're doing over time. But those are, again, challenges. And today our challenge is how do we scale this? We have a lot of sites now. We have 600 plus sites. But how do we scale this globally? How do we get it to more and more sites? How do we get to 10,000 sites, for example? So that is the challenge now. So every step we'll have the next challenge that is always going to come up.
I think you summed up the challenges pretty well. And I think looking at over the last year or so under SAMRIDH, we have possibly screened over 100 plus tech-based startups. And I would totally agree that many of the challenges that you mentioned, which you have kind of done really well on, many of the startups today are struggling on that. And biggest one being the credibility. And that's the first advice we give them, that you believe in your product, but the rest of the world also needs to believe in your product. And that's where the value of research and papers and doing it with credible institutions with proper sample sizes comes in handy. And I think yours could be a good case study for others to replicate as well, seeing that what kind of papers, whether it's Lancet or the Harvard journals and other could definitely help in getting that credibility, not just globally, but also within the Indian ecosystem. Unfortunately, the Indian ecosystem also, when they look at a made in India company, they also have their own doubts. They are also used to big names coming from the Western countries and providing, whether it's softwares or other medtech devices. But I think the last point that you mentioned is also very, very critical, getting the paid users and then continuously kind of adding that to the kitty, scaling it as you move forward. Because a lot of the cases we've seen is that people do find a solution, but then they're searching for the problem. And I think the point that you mentioned, that find the pain points and structure your solution towards them, rather than doing the other way, getting a good solution and then trying to find a problem to solve that. That goes a long way in addressing or finding the paid user, as you rightly said. But if you see, like the SAMRIDH support started a few months back with you, how has been your journey with SAMRIDH, and do you see SAMRIDH helping you in kind of addressing some of the challenges, specifically as you tried now to scale up your operations further?
Oh, absolutely. I think Himanshu, SAMRIDH has been really critical in us scaling up, and our goal is to get to 50 sites and do 62,500 scans together with SAMRIDH, right? And we are already on our way to getting there. We have deployed at several sites over the last few months, and that is scaling up. We are adding more and more sites by the day. So that is, again, this is the start of the program, but over the next several months, right? This is something that is going to create a substantial impact, and we'll end up having screened about 62,000 plus patients for TB and COVID, and being able to diagnose them with TB. And that's a big challenge. I think the main challenge is that today what happens is, especially with TB, right? I think COVID has got that aura. People know about COVID a lot, but when you go to a doctor with TB, if you have TB, doctor will not diagnose TB initially. What happens, and I've heard this from so many people, right? That what happens is that they will initially think it's a common flu. They will give you azithromycin or whatever. They will give you some medication. You treat that, then you that doesn't go away, then you come back. So it's a very long process of TB diagnosis, and that is where you also end up with this drug-resistant TBs, because you are basically treating with some drugs and ending with a more a more sort of virulent strain of TB, right? And that's I think what we are solving for by putting our solutions at the point of care. As an X-ray is taken, we can create jointly with Samrid and Qure. We can basically identify at that point of care X-ray is taken whether it's TB or not, right? And if you think about that, we are doing it only for 62,500 scans, but theoretically, this could be applied to every scan, probably 100, 200 million scans that are taken in the country, where as soon as the X-ray is taken, we can within few seconds tell whether this is potentially TB or not. And if you're able to act on that patient at that point of time, it will save a huge amount of time for that patient in terms of diagnostic effort, right? I mean, they won't have to run around trying to find that it's TB. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge that we are solving together, and look forward to working on that. And I think, I mean, we'll see more numbers coming out, more results coming out over the next several months. But thank you for trusting in us. Thank you for partnering with us. And we are very, very proud to be part of this program and look forward to working with you in creating this impact across the nation.
Definitely. That's the kind of journey we also want to be with Qure.ai. And in fact, you mentioned about the solution getting scaled to 50 odd sites through SAMRIDH support. But I think the bigger idea is that to create that proof of concept within the health ecosystem in the country, that the algorithm as a diagnostic tool, as a screening tool, can impact lives on the ground and take it to the millions of tests or the X-rays that happen on a daily basis in the country, and ensure that each and every TB patient gets identified, or each and every COVID patient gets identified quickly and gets the right kind of treatment as they move forward. In terms of like now, you are like pure play private sector player trying to impact both private healthcare space as well as, and more so in the public healthcare space. TB is a public challenge. The Prime Minister has put it as a mission to eliminate TB from the country. So while working with the public sector, you see private sector becoming more and more an equal player in the journey to fight public health challenges, or you still see that there is that kind of, in a way, there's still that amount of distrust or things that, okay, this is public sector, this is private sector, or do you see that line becoming thinner?
Line is becoming thinner for sure, but I think there is that. I mean, see, it's a challenge that needs to be solved. First is the private sector being interested in these problems, because it feels like, I mean, something like a TB is a sort of poor man's problem or poor country problem, right? Nobody who is a sort of serious company in AI space would want to focus on TB, right? That is one. I mean, getting that interest first is hard, because you have to make people aware that there is a real problem that needs to be solved. And for private people to get involved, private companies to get involved, you have to also create a commercial opportunity for them. Because otherwise, if there is no commercial opportunity, private companies will not get involved, right? So that, I think, is the first thing to solve. And I know that within India also, we are doing globally also, there is more Stop TB partnership, Global Fund and others are trying to get more and more private companies to participate. And I mean, USAID, I mean, everybody is sort of getting that private sector involved, right? So that's happening to some extent. I think in the context of India, right, I think what we have to solve is, I mean, there is private sector definitely, and there is also these partnerships that are there. I think the government has to figure out how to adopt these technologies to scale it. And that is something which I don't think we have seen yet. I mean, we have seen at Qure, we have seen partnerships like with SAMRIDH, we have one partnership with India Health Fund, we have partnerships with some other programs. There was a CHRI program which was funded by Global Fund where we partnered. So there is that NGO plus sort of private sector partnership that is there. But getting that to government hospitals, directly working with the government, is something which has not been solved yet. And I think that's where we have to figure that out. How do we basically get all the government sites to start using these kinds of technologies to help alleviate, I mean, help basically diagnose TB better and treat TB patients faster. So that's something which we need to figure out, and it's not yet. It's still sort of work in progress, I would say. Needs a little bit more time to get that figured out.
Definitely, and I think that things are changing, as you rightly said. But yeah, that push is still required at different levels. But yeah, based on your experience, any thoughts or any messages for other budding entrepreneurs who are working in this space, be it using AI or using medtech as a line of business? Any thoughts?
No, I think you said it. I mean, right. I mean, Himanshu, I think my advice is that first focus on where are the pain points and solve that. I mean, because that is the most important. Don't come from, okay, I have this technology. How do I use it? Come from where are the pain points and how can I build technology which can address those pain points. And if you start with that, then you are actually more likely to produce a solution which is going to create value for an end user. Number one. Number two, again, I mean, I think you also stressed on that, and you said you are also telling your the companies that you evaluate, right? The building credibility is very very important in healthcare. Publishing is very important in healthcare, and especially more so as an Indian company, we have to focus on that. And if we don't do that, and we have to create that, it's not. I mean, it's about creating that mindset that we have to publish, we have to do research, and we have a lot of researchers both inside the country and outside the country who can participate in that kind of research, right? It's just a matter of getting people involved and working on that. So I think that building that credibility in healthcare is important, and that I would say is paramount. I mean, we have to work towards that. And lastly, I think it's about. I mean, again, I mean, keeping on evolving the product over time, and this is finally. See, I mean, unlike any product which is consumer product where you can take risks, right? Here, I mean, this is patients' lives who are involved. So you have to always be very mindful, very cautious, keep on making sure that everything on the back end, you're sort of improving the product as required, you're figuring out where the errors are. Because it's I mean, finally a patient who's at the end of that, who's at the end of the care pathway. Of course, we're not directly dealing with patients, but even dealing with doctors, I mean, you have to provide a high quality solution. So improving quality, keeping quality in mind is important.
Thanks a lot, Prashant. And I think so you summed it up really well for the other entrepreneurs and startups, and something that we also keep telling, that solve the right problem, be credible, and keep evolving your solution. Never stop that journey, because these journeys are just the beginning of the great work that you have been doing and all of the startups in the country are doing. And there's a better, long distance to be covered till we kind of achieve the goals that we have set up for ourselves as well as for the country and the world overall. Thanks a lot, Prashant, for the time today, and it was lovely speaking with you. We definitely look forward to kind of continuing the partnership between SAMRIDH and Qure.ai, and help in whatever matter we can in your journey to scale up from maybe 600 sites to 60,000 sites over the next few years. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Himanshu. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for trusting in Cure to partner with your organization and create this impact at a national level. And thank you for being part of our journey to grow from 600 to 60,000. So look forward to working together. Look forward to creating a lot of impact. Thanks again.